The next account I looked into was my HSA. I wondered if I could copy the strategy of calls and puts within my HSA. This took some work, but I found out it is possible. As with all videos in this series, this is not a recommendation to open a HSA or any specific type of account. I am not a financial advisor. All the knowledge I have on the HSA is limited to my personal research on it. This is just an account of what I've done with my HSA.
I was already somewhat familiar with the HSA, especially the rules is much similar to a Roth IRA. For 2022, I can contribute a max of $3,650 if it was for myself alone, or $7,300 for family. What I was mainly interested in is whether or not I could do covered calls and buy stock within my HSA. I went to Charles Schwab since they have all of my investments currently. And looking at Schwab, they do offer what's called an HSBA. So basically, a HSBA is a self-directed brokerage account that resides within your HSA. In addition to investment choices typically offered by the HSA, and what I've noticed through most HSAs, they have their own set of little mutual funds and own set of stocks baskets basically that is normally tailored to whatever company it is that you're working with. But I wanted to be able to just buy randomly whatever I wanted, and I was able to do this through an HSBA. So how it works, your health savings provider must offer a brokerage option as part of your HSA in order for you to open the account. You decide how much money to transfer from your HSA into your HSBA. You can invest your HSBA assets in any eligible investment options for health savings account. So through my research on this, the first thing that I found out is the HSA has to go through a HSA provider. So there's certain companies that provide HSA and you have to go through them. Once you found the HSA provider, some of them, not all, will allow you to open a broker account, which is that HSBA we were looking at earlier. And each one of those brokers have their own rules on whether they allow you to buy stocks. And from all the research I've done, the only possible option level would be 0, or depending on the way the company worded it, but basic covered calls and cash covered puts could be possible. And my HSA was done through my work, so I already knew that I qualified for it. But there were rules. If you not covered at work, you have to have a high deductible health plan in order to open an HSA. This is something that you have to follow these rules, or you could get in pretty big trouble and will end up owing a lot on it. So what I did was I looked up a list of HSA providers, and my work eventually, it was with Benefit Wallet, and through Benefit Wallet, they had their own little bucket of mutual funds. There was no investing into a broker account at all. The next year we switched to Health Equity, and the same, you were able to invest, but it was just a bucket of their mutual funds. So I basically just started calling all the different HSAs. I asked them, if I already have an HSA at work, can I just transfer that HSA to you guys? And going down the list, eventually I called like 4 or 5 of these before I got to Optum Bank. Or actually what I did was I called Charles Schwab and I asked, do they have an HSBA, which they said they did. And I asked if I can do, covered calls in there, at least level 0 worth of options. And they say, yes, that's possible. And they work with Optum Bank. So I called Optum Bank and I asked if it was possible to switch my HSA to them. They said, yeah, you can do that anytime you want. So I went to Health Equity, and I didn't close out my account because I didn't want to, when it came to tax seasons, I didn't want it to be too complicated. And since my work already provided that I had insurance through them. I kept letting it be withdrawal through Health Equity, and I transferred from Health Equity to Optum Bank. This process took a while. I think it was like a month and a half. Finally, I got Optum Bank. I was excited. I opened my Charles Schwab HSBA and applied for options. Well, come to find out, they don't allow options, and I explained that I talked to a lady. They said they did, and she's like, no, we don't. So I kept looking. I went to Hsa Bank next. Well, Hsa Bank works with TD Ameritrade. So I called TD Ameritrade, and they said, yes, you can get approved for options. So it took another month and a half or so. I closed out the Optum and transferred everything to Hsa Bank, and then just transferred to Hsa Bank from my Health Equity whenever I had the money. Well, then another thing with Optum Bank, you had to keep $2,000 into Optum Bank, and once you had more than $2,000, everything else I was able to transfer to Charles Schwab. Well, with Hsa Bank, they only required me to keep $1,000 in the HSA, and then I was able to transfer all the rest of it to TD Ameritrade. And then with TD Ameritrade, I were in fact able to go ahead and open a options trading account. So I was able to do the calls, or I am able to do the calls in Hsa Bank and TD Ameritrade. So basically the way it's set up, so as I contributed to my HSA, which was Health Equity, it came directly out of my check. And I just want to point this out that my work contributed, I think it's $1,000 added a year. With those contribution limits, whatever your employer adds also counts towards that contribution limit. So just be aware of that. And also, unlike the Roth, how you can have an HSA and your wife can, or your spouse can have an HSA, but there's one total amount. So there's a lot of, I did an extensive research on this, so this ain't something you should just jump straight into unless you fully understand it, to make sure that you don't go over the limits. So just make sure that those are being checked. So once those went into Health Equity, I transferred it to my HSA Bank. So that's another thing. I could have just zeroed it out on the Health Equity through the work. I could, even though I had insurance through them, I could have contributed zero through my work, and then just outside of work contributed to my HSA as long as I wasn't going over the limit. And then once I had the HSA open, I had to keep $1,000, and all the rest of the funds was able to go into TD Ameritrade. So as far as opening the HSA Bank, I basically just went to Google, typed in HSA Bank, and I clicked on, it says Health Savings Account. I clicked on Health Savings Account, and that brought me to the HSA Bank page. Again, it was just something I did outside of work. I knew I qualified for the HSA because I was doing it through my employer. I could have just zeroed out what I was putting in through them and just straight deposit into the HSA. So if the limit, for example, and this is just an example, but let's say I had a family plan and it was $7,000 a year was the max I was required or allowed to put into my HSA, you can basically divide that by 12 and you could put a total of $583 a month in. So this is another thing. If you only have coverage, say for January, February, March, it's better to do it this way by putting in $583. That way you don't put in the whole $7,000 and then something happens and you lack coverage, because it becomes a mess when it comes to taxes and trying to figure all of that out. I wanted to keep it simple. So basically, if it was $583 a month and I worked for 4 months, or I only had coverage for 4 months, I would take that $583 and times it by 4. And I know that $2,332 was the most I was allowed to put in. But the way I was doing it, I was just putting in basically the month after I worked. I would always put in for that month, however much the max amount was. So if I was to stop contributing at work, or if I was only putting in $83 at work, I can actually put $500 a month in here and I would still get the form from my work. That way, you know, it was easier when I went to do taxes. But basically, I came here to Hsa Bank. I clicked right up here on Open an HSA, and it was really easy to do. I just filled out my name, email, verified my email address. I think that was pretty much it. And if I scroll to the bottom here, what do I need to apply? By clicking on that, it goes over a lot of the rules and what is needed and whether or not, you know, I was eligible to open an HSA. And once I logged in, there's a little navigator here on the top, and one says accounts. So I had clicked on accounts and I went down to investments. And at the time, you know, here I do have TD Ameritrade, so it's already listed here. But when I first clicked on it, it said, do you want to invest? And TD Ameritrade was the option. I clicked on that, and I want to say it was pretty easy. You just fill out, it's real quick. It's kind of like filling out just a little application. And once that happens, you'll create a login through TD Ameritrade, and then from TD Ameritrade. And you know, TD Ameritrade is just a regular broker account, really. It looks the same as any other broker account. And I can't remember if I just used their forms once I logged in there, or I might have just called them. You just call them and tell them you want option level 0, and you should be able to start duplicating what you're doing in the business account, Roth IRA, any other account. And again, once you have this account set up, you can do a dividend portfolio. You could buy stocks, ETFs. You can pretty much what you could do with any broker account. You know, the highest level option trading they're going to give you is just a covered calls and selling cash covered puts. But other than that, it's just like any broker account. You basically took control of your HSA, and you no longer have to buy those. If you want to invest in your HSA, which you should be doing, if you have an HSA, you should be investing. Even though their little packaged mutual funds aren't the greatest, it's better than just letting it sit there. But by doing it this way, you could take advantage of it and take control of your HSA.
Again, I just want to stress how much time I put into getting this all straight. It is strongly advised you do research on the HSA and make sure you don't run into any tax issues. Over contributing and trying to correct it is just a massive headache. In the next video, I'll jump into building a dividend portfolio.